So next we have Sarah Ulrichsen, who's a PhD candidate in the Human Dimensions Lab with advisor Dr. Chris Chizinski, just like Maddie. Sarah has a bachelor's degree in biology with a minor in history from Central Connecticut State University. Her previous research experience includes looking at the impacts of outdoor recreation on the environment of Northwest Montana, where she has worked in the past. Sarah strives to better understand why people choose to participate in outdoor recreation, especially recreational anglers. She is currently studying social and economic valuation of anglers down in Kansas, and today she'll be talking to us about species preferences and angler motivational factors in Kansas.
Thank you, Nancy. Let's see if I can get this to work. Okay. All right, awesome. So I would like to start off with a question. Why do people go fishing? Well, maybe anglers enjoy catching large or trophy-sized fish, or maybe like to keep the fish that they catch, whether that's because they enjoy the taste or for the nutritional benefits. Maybe fishing is a part of anglers' identities or their sense of self. On the other hand, maybe fishing is a social or a family event and a tradition for folks. Or maybe anglers are choosing to go fishing based on favorably perceived year regulations or because certain species are able to be caught. So overall, this is an incredibly broad question, which has been a driving force behind fisheries management in the past. And collectively, these reasons are called motivations and can be defined here as the multitude of goals that drive interests and activities prior to participation. And so most researchers agree that fishing is a goal-oriented behavioral process where anglers choose behaviors to achieve desired outcomes, and that understanding motivations can help managers to design policies and regulations that align with these expected outcomes, whether they be related to social, psychological, or physical benefits. And so why do angler motivations even matter? Well, understanding motivations can allow state and federal fish and wildlife agencies to minimize conflict between user groups and to assess the demand for specific elements of a fishing experience. Motivations can also help to predict levels of support for management decisions, and they can also be used to tailor opportunities to meet the needs and desires of anglers by recognizing the diversity of reasons of why they participate. And so this is largely done by identifying aspects of what draws individuals to prefer participating in one activity over another, providing a foundation that managers can use to attract individuals with similar motivations to similar activities. And so motivations for going fishing can be as diverse as the individuals who participate in it, and segmentation of these anglers into groups such as angler morality, race or ethnicity, gender, or fishing preferences often display different emphases on the primary reasons for engaging in fishing participation. And recent shifts in angler demographics and corresponding changes in motivations suggest that fisheries managers may need to revisit angling opportunities to meet the needs of this changing population. Recreational angler motivations are not static, nor have they ever been. And as motivational changes affect fishing engagement, they also alter license and equipment sales, which today are some of the most fundamental sources for funding for fisheries management. So the knowledge of the diversity of motivations can aid managers in assessing the various demands of user groups in terms of the experiences that they are seeking. Most conclusions from angler motivation studies indicate that non-catch motives are more important to anglers than the catch motives. However, more experienced anglers frequently cited catch motives as the most important across a range of target species. And this indicates that the more specialized anglers may be more catch-oriented than previously assumed, and are more dependent on specific species to meet their experience preferences. So the influence that sought species can have on general angling motivations is pretty well documented at this point. However, the reasons behind actually choosing a specific type of fish to target is not well studied at all. So this led us to our research question, which was, why do anglers choose to fish for their preferred species? And so in order to gather species motivation information, our survey, which took place down in Kansas, was distributed statewide, and a spatially stratified random sample of anglers who had purchased a fishing license within the 5-year timeframe between 2018 and 2022 were drawn from the Kansas Licensed Angler database. And so in 2023, we sampled 8,000 of those Kansas anglers for our survey, the statewide distribution of which is shown here in this map. with the gray shaded zip codes representing those that did not have a sampled angler within it. Black shaded zip codes indicate at least one sample or one angler, and the brighter the color of the zip code, the more samples were taken from that area. And again, these were randomly selected. And we first asked anglers what type of fish they primarily saw when fishing in Kansas, to which they could choose from a variety of popular fish types in the state. So we have those listed out here. And then to collect information on why anglers chose to target certain fish types, we asked them, how well do each of the following explain why you target the type of fish you primarily seek in Kansas? And so this question was then followed by a list of statements to which anglers could respond along a scale of not at all explaining to completely explaining why they chose to target that specific type. So in order to break down the motivation statements into more manageable as well as more meaningful groups, we ran an exploratory factor analysis, which ultimately sorted each item, which we'll see along the y-axis there, into one of 5 factors, which we can see along the top of the figure. And so each of these factors were then named based on which items were sorted into the factor and had a loading score of 0.3 or above. And so any item that met this score minimum in more than one factor was just removed from the analysis. And so we can see the loading scores along the y-axis, which is then repeated, or along the x-axis, which is repeated for each factor box. So here we have the harvest factor and its associated items, which included keeping fish that are caught, fishing for nutrition and fishing for taste, and catching a bag limit, which all show up as those darker blue and purple bars. Next, we had the identity factor and its associated statements, which included fishing for the preferred type of fish as being part of an angler's identity, reflecting who they are as an angler, as well as who they are as a person. The fish size factor included catching trophy fish, wanting to catch the biggest fish, and being important to catch a large fish in general during the fishing experience. The types of options available at a location, here I'm referring to it as the type at location factor, included statements such as a location being a favorite due to the preferred fish type being present there, the option to use preferred gear types for that specific type of fish, and liking to fish for a specific type because it is present at a nearby fishing location. And the final factor that was revealed by our exploratory factor analysis was family tradition. And this included statements about how fishing for that type was important to family, was an important hobby for the family, and that teaching others to fish for that type was a reason to choose to continue targeting that type of fish. And so once the items were sorted into factors, we then needed to look at whether these factors differed among types of fish being targeted by anglers. So to do this, we took factor scores, which essentially indicate a calculated value of how strongly each angler relates to each factor. And so these scores are going to be found along the x-axis, and then we broke each factor along the top again down into the 5 fish type groups, and that's going to be along the right-hand side of that figure. And then we looked at the density of the factor scores within each group, formed by the cross-section of targeted species and factor, and these densities are going to be found along the y-axis. So diving into that, for example, in this cross-section of the family tradition factor and angler seeking walleyes, we can see that most anglers had scores of kind of middling value, but there's a slight skew towards the more positive scores on the right, indicating that walleye anglers frequently stated that family tradition-based statements were part of the reason why they chose to target walleyes. And then this importance is then translated into that higher association score with this factor. However, so as you can see, our family tradition factor was pretty similar across all fish types, as evidenced by that non-significant p-value when evaluated at an alpha level of 0.05, when an ANOVA was run across the fish types. Next, we have the fish size factor, which showed that there were indeed significant differences among fish types, evidenced by the significant p-value. The harvest factor was very significant, which we can clearly seen in the drastic differences in factor scores among the fish types, and which was confirmed by another significant p-value. The identity factor was also found to be significantly different among fish types. And finally, the type at location factor followed a similar trend to the family tradition factor, in that though there were some differences among fish types, they were not pronounced enough to be significant when an ANOVA was run. So kind of zooming into those motivational factors that were significantly different across fish types, we first had fish size. And so within this factor, when multiple comparison testing was run among species types, we saw two significant groupings were found. And so the first of these comparisons being that anglers targeting catfish and panfish were significantly different in how well size-related statements explained why they chose to target their respective fish types. And the same was true between panfish and black bass anglers. And this indicates that the reasons behind anglers targeting these specific fish types differ in importance. And that really suggests that fish size plays a distinct role in their decision-making processes. The next and the most significant of the three factors that showed differences among species types was the factor encompassing harvest-related statements. So again, that's keeping the fish that are caught, fishing for nutrition and taste, and being able to harvest a bag limit. So 8 out of the 10 possible comparisons within this factor were significant. And this indicates that harvest-related statements are highly fish type dependent. For example, black bass anglers did not find harvest-related statements to be an important factor in choosing to target that fish type, possibly because of the historical emphasis on trophy black bass fishing. However, the opposite was true for walleye anglers, where harvest-related statements were very important to those anglers, maybe because walleyes are commonly perceived as being a fish to catch and catch a large number of and then eat. So our final significant motivational factor was identity, which includes statements on fishing being part of an angler's identity, and fish type reflecting who they are as people and as anglers. So all of the anglers, regardless of their preferred fish type, had pretty generally negative scores, meaning that they did not choose to target their fish type based on identity-related reasons. And there was only one grouping of fish types in this factor that had a significant difference between them, that being between panfish and black bass anglers, with black bass anglers seemingly to identify more with their fish type as compared to those panfish anglers. And so overall, as we just saw, 3 of the 5 factors were significantly different when compared across fish types, of which only one factor was non-catch related, that being identity. And so this means that the level of psychological connection or association people have with a species varied depending on which fish they were targeting. For example, some anglers may have a different level of connection to the fish type, which could be derived from a deeper personal or cultural connection to those species, which then influences their choice of target fish. So then moving on to the significant catch-related factors, the reasons for targeting fish based on harvest potential or size were dependent on the species anglers were seeking. And so ultimately this does make sense because different fish species offer different kinds of opportunities in terms of size, abundance, or suitability for harvest. For example, anglers targeting catfish might prioritize the chance to catch a large or trophy fish, while those targeting panfish may focus more so on the numbers or on the ease of catch. So what this all suggests is that when anglers choose their target species, they do so based on the unique opportunities those species provide, especially catch-related factors, and not the more generalized reasons for fishing, which might be had with any type of fish. Examples of those more generalized non-catch-related fishing experiences were found in our 2 non-significant factors, those being family tradition and type of location, which really indicated that there are some common themes across all fish types and should not be ignored. For the family tradition factor across all fish types, we saw similar alignments. And in our case, this means that Kansas anglers are likely influenced by shared or similar traditions and community values when making their choices to target fish types. And the type of location factor showed more variation, but the scores were all kind of in that middling range. And this implies that targeting a certain type of fish is influenced by factors other than what is offered in terms of species or gear regulations at a location. And this might be due to the fact that Kansas gear regulations are not overly variable, and that there is accessibility of each of the included fish types pretty much across the state. And so even these 2 factors seem to affect groups of anglers in similar ways. And this suggests that these motivations are common ground between angler groups, and this common ground should not be overlooked because of their similarity across angler types. So knowing what elements of a fishing experience are or are not important to groups of species-specific angler groups allows for tailored management of these conditions, which really helps to boost angler satisfaction. And keeping in mind that anglers may be seeking different experiences depending on their targeted fish type is important to managing fisheries. And understanding that anglers seek both catch and non-catch related experiences, and also that these reasons can be different among groups of anglers, is essential so that fisheries can be managed to support and foster these differing motivations. This means marketing and managing water bodies in ways that cater towards not only the ecology and available habitats in the area, but also for the anglers who are or who stand to become the stewards of their environments and their favored species through behavioral or psychological connections to their fishing experience. For example, if we know that a specific water body has a certain type of fish and that anglers value harvesting that fish, then the water body might be marketed and managed in a way that enhances the available opportunities. So in future studies, we may find that variation arises across different spatial and demographic variables. For example, anglers seeking each type of fish in different regions or with different demographic backgrounds may prioritize various aspects of fishing. And there's also the potential for increased specialization to affect angler reasons for targeting specific fish types. As anglers become more knowledgeable or develop more specific preferences, they might prefer more niche experiences and therefore seek greater customization in their fishing experience. So circling all the way back to our original question of why do people go fishing? Well, in our case, we see that it really does depend. And in this study, we saw that it depends on the type of fish that anglers are targeting. And so what this ultimately tells us is that identifying and tailoring the types of fishing opportunities available to the diversity of anglers might be important, as it is through such fishing opportunities that recreational fishing participation will not only carry on into the future, but also contribute to continued or even elevated conservation stewardship. Thank you.
Well, it's time for questions again. And Sarah, yeah, if you can just repeat the question so people on Zoom can hear.
Can do. Jenna, I saw your hand first. Okay.
Sorry, I have a clarification question about the identity plots. So the negative factor loading is they don't care, right?
Yeah, so it's
How
hard
does
to
like an impact or affect influence?
Yeah, so it's basically in plain English, it's saying that the identity factor, those statements were not overly important in choosing their targeted type of fish, if that makes sense.
Yes, but then you went on to say, was it catfish versus?
Oh, yeah, there were significant differences, but overall, in general, identity was not overly important for most folks, but there were some differences in that, and then we had significant differences between some of the different fish type groups within the identity factor, but overall, the identity factor was not super important for all fish types.
Okay, so it's just like these guys just care even less.
I know, yeah. Yeah.
Understood that kind of great. Okay.
Yeah. I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, I'm curious, do you think like the motivation for what fish to catch and why is like a lot different between freshwater and saltwater fishing?
Yeah, so the question was, is there a difference between freshwater and saltwater motivations? Is that, yeah. So I am no expert on saltwater, but I would assume, just knowing what I know about fisheries in general, the average angler is usually more non-catch motivated in that they are more interested in spending time with family, spending time outdoors, getting to know more about the environment, that kind of a thing. They're not necessarily out there to catch the biggest fish, the most amount. Those are the more specialized anglers. So I think, again, this is me just hypothesizing, but I would assume that something similar would be happening in saltwater areas as well. But I don't know that for sure.
Okay. Any more questions?
What motivates you to fish? Big motivation.
I like to go outside. That's my motivation. And then also I get to spend time with my dad. That's what really got me into it. Yeah, Alice.
Have you seen studies like this done, like, I guess, carried out in other states, or maybe like a state like Montana that has a lot of that fly fishing? And
Yeah, so I would love to delve more into fly fishermen. They are a unique breed of anglers. Um, so I have not seen any that specifically go into why do people target specific species. There's not a whole lot about that, but motivations research is, you can find that pretty much for any area of the country. So yes, I've seen some from Montana, and usually, at least from what I've read, the fly fishermen have very different motivations. Than, because they're more, and this is a generalization, they're more so focused on like conservation, or they, than the more traditional rod and reel angler that you might find around here. Again, gross simplification, but
Do you see a big difference between rural and urban fishing?
so that was a big part of some of my other research that I've been working on. I haven't yet to look at motivations for urban and rural, but I can tell you there are differences for sense of place for urban and rural folks in Kansas. So that sense of place being like how connected people are to their favorite fishing location. So there are pretty significant differences.
An idea if people from urban areas seek out kind of urban fishing spots or rural ones, or is there a lot of like cross traffic there? And
Yeah, so that's kind of a tough one because there are a lot of folks that are in, like, they reside in an urban area, and a lot of those folks, just because of ease of access, will go to the more urban areas for fishing. However, we also see a lot of folks that are going to like the bigger water bodies. So for example, like here in Nebraska, we might see folks who are from the Omaha area, and they're kind of, if they're on a day trip, they might go to the Omaha lakes. However, if they're looking for like a big fishing trip, they might haul all the way out to Lake McConaughey, for example. So it kind of depends. So Lake McConaughey would be more on the rural side of things. It depends. And there's a lot of good research out there about that, but I don't know exactly what like the specifics are.
Are there any questions on Zoom?
I didn't see any pop up, but I don't know where the chat is.
I guess I have one more this time.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, how do you feel that your research, how do you anticipate your research might influence management?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to provide this information in terms of what kinds of anglers are out there, what they're looking for in a specific fishing experience. And I'm hoping to be able to provide that to Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, who I'm working with. And I'm hoping that they'll be able to kind of, I don't know, if not revamp their fishing regulations, at least be able to inform their fishing regulations based on what their anglers want or need. So that's just kind of like high level, but hoping to be able to influence some sort of fishing regulations, and also if there's any stocking implications, because there's some stuff in my survey that's talking about like what's their desired fish length, what are they considered a trophy fish, that kind of a thing. So we're getting more down into the nitty gritty. So kind of being able to provide, listen, your folks are looking for this category of length for catfish. Maybe we should be kind of prioritizing that within fisheries management, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I guess kind of a question building off that. Do you know if fisheries management is more geared towards giving anglers what they want, or
I think it totally depends on who you ask. If you ask me, I'm much more of the human side of things, because I'm thinking about like the funding and how fisheries management is funded through participation in fishing, essentially. However, if you would ask a more traditional fish biologist, they might tell you we need to be managing only for the fish. We don't care what the humans think. So it kind of depends. I would love it if we could find a middle ground, but we're still working on that. Cool. Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah, and thank you for listening to Maddie and Sarah. If you're not familiar with who I am, my name's Bailey, and yeah, you probably have gotten a lot of emails from me, but if you're interested in doing this as well, go ahead and sign up. You've probably gotten a link in an email, just search back in an SNR GSA email, or talk to me after this if, yeah, you want to sign up. But thank you all.
Not this year. I gotta get through this spawning season.
That's fair.
That's all right.
Thank you, everyone.
I don't think
So
so.
you can pull up your slides and go through the feedback. Sarah, one thing for you.
Yeah.
I can't believe I missed it.
What?
It's one thing. So for